Brilliant. Okay, just there we go. Okay, cool. So I'm here to talk about research, and I'm going to quickly introduce myself. Yeah, that is actually appropriate to say myself because there are various hats that I do wear at various times. So I think, hello, newcomer. I can hear your microphone. If you wouldn't mind just muting you, that would be really great. So anyways, as I was saying, I wear various hats in my profession, and indeed, I'm an alumni of the MAD program. Sorry, guys, just 1 second. I'm having a bit of a technical issue here. Great. Okay, so when I was on your course that you guys are doing now, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea that planning and strategy existed. Even though it is a profession that's been around for a few decades, it's still relatively new. I just happened to end up in it because of the things that I did in the MAD course. And that was things that I'll get into later. But predominantly, every project that I did within the teams that I was a part of would involve starting the project by just informing myself of the topic that I was exploring. And often I would do that by just literally going out to the streets and interviewing people that were passing the apartment or by the business school and asking them a set of questions that was associated with the project I was working on. And I'll get more into that, but that is the premise of what planning and strategy is all about. You can call it planning, you can call it strategy, it doesn't really matter, but depending on where you're from, Americans tend to call it strategy, and British and the rest of the world seem to call it planning. Over the last few years, I've also been on the side of typical millennial. I have other passion projects that I do, particularly around filmmaking and photography. But most recently, for the last, let's say 3.5 years, I've been deeply rooted in qualitative research. So I hear you saying, what is qualitative research? Very simply speaking, it is interviews, surveys, group sessions, and spending the day with people. People will call it different things: deep dives, immersions, inspiration sessions, city tours. There's all kinds of like buzzwords around it, but essentially it's a practice around research that is focused on people. And for myself, most recently, that has taken me to some pretty interesting places. Here, I just wanted to share a couple of photographs of a recent project that I've been working on for Nike, which required me to go to Saudi Arabia to explore the recent social liberalization of that country and its people, and the effect that is having on culture, on sport and culture. So just a couple of photographs to share with you. Little spoiler alert, one of the key points I kind of wanted to share with you guys here is that doing research is taking your camera and getting out there and capturing as much as you can and making something of it, because that is essentially that is what you bring back to the table, and that is how you inspire other people. And so these photos I'm just sharing with you now, it's probably one of the highlights of last year for me, was a midnight walk in the desert in Saudi Arabia with a whole bunch of people who during the daylight hours would never normally hang out together, would never be this close, would never be mixing in genders, are out together doing something completely unheard of. And it was just one of many experiences I had on this particular project that required me to go into the field, to spend time with people, to experience their lives and the things that are important to them, for the hope of taking that back to our client, which was Nike, and inform them on the opportunities that were available to them. But yeah, so as Mike said, I have changed in the last 10 years. I've worked on all kinds of clients doing similar things that require me to position products and stores and shoes and define target audiences for a whole array of different fields. And today I just want to what I want to do is describe about 4 sort of broad stroke categories of things that I consider good research. But before we do that, I just kind of want to introduce you. And as far as I know, the way the course structure for you guys has been set out is the beginning of the year is rooted in research and strategy. And as you move through the semesters, you focus on a creative output or a dissertation or a final creative project. And because I have worked in strategy or planning, I just wanted to quickly nod to the kind of things that you will need to be able to pull and draw to shape the work that you're going to create. And again, there are different ways of describing these building blocks to any strategy, but essentially it's these sort of 3 broad stroke categories. You're going to have a problem, and it could be a business problem, a human problem. It may be described as a barrier or an enemy, and you need to essentially find an insightful perspective or shift or reframing of that problem, and then establish a desired outcome. And that desired outcome could be defined as a proposition, a positioning statement, a plan. There's all kinds of things that you could sort of tools to help you just define that outcome. So anyways, just wanted to quickly nod to strategy because I know that that's where you guys are going. So anyways, as I was saying, my point of view on research, this is literally my perspective. It's my perspective that's rooted in qualitative research. So it's sort of touching on some of the things I was just showing you previously. And I've just sort of put it into these 4 pillars. So it's questions, it's good people, it's systems, and it's documenting. So, okay. So I'm gonna, it's worth mentioning actually that before to kind of just read this out to you, maybe like a lot of you, the last few months have been kind of weird. And so probably like most people, I'm taking stock of my career and what I do. And so this has been a great opportunity to not only sort of share something with some students, and for the hope of maybe helping you, but this has actually been a selfish pursuit of me defining what I do and have been doing for the past couple of years. So it's going to get a little bit manifesto-y for the next few slides. So first category, questions. Research is about questions. Questions posed from many places, from clients, from teachers, and also from within. It's about asking yourself whether these questions are the right questions, because the world will offer you up many leading questions. And a leading question, if you're sort of not aware of that, is a question that essentially points people to the answer you wish them to have. It's important to remember that our job, or your job when you're doing research, is to really provoke the reveal of something you do not know, something we do not know. I won't go through all these sort of quotes that I've shared in the document. I will share this document with you guys at a later date. But I've laced this document with either quotes from things that I've read or from people I know that I've had kind of conversations with. Yeah, so that's in there for you. Questions should flow naturally from one to the next. One of the sort of key tools that we use in research is something called a discussion guide. And a discussion guide is essentially a predetermined set of questions that you're going to go into a situation and ask your subject. And it's so important to get the flow right. If you go in literally and ask people, what is the meaning of life, they're literally going to just fall over backwards. You really have to warm people up. You have to establish a connection with them, and you have to slowly build to these deeper questions that you may wish to ask. So think about how you're going to get to those questions. It's the ongoing review of the questions. So often I would be in a situation where I've got this discussion guide, and we would be using it to talk to, say, a group of 8 people. And you may get to a certain point or a certain question, and there's like a rebellion in the room where people don't get it. It creates too much disharmony in the group, because you obviously want people to get along, but also have a healthy discussion with varied opinions. So again, asking questions, but also asking yourself, what are the right questions? Are these questions reconfirming things you already knew? Are they questions that are creating more clarity or confusion? Ensure that you ask yourself if these questions are the right questions. So next point. Sometimes this is sort of more from the perspective of, say, when you get hired and you're being commissioned by a client to go off to explore a subject. Sometimes you might be involved because you know something. And that gives us permission to, well, sorry, I should say we know nothing of the subject. So for example, I went to Ireland last year to understand how food culture and actual Irish culture is changing in Ireland in 2019. I'm not Irish, I've never lived there, and I was invited there because I was a fresh mind, I was fresh eyes, and this enabled me to sort of go into the room and ask questions that may sound absurd, or maybe people weren't allowed to ask, and sort of get more interesting answers. However, sometimes you can be hired because you're actually really knowledgeable on a subject, and you can ask sharper questions quicker and get to the sort of deeper issue or problem that the client is yet able to see. Regardless, you should essentially always enter any situation assuming you know nothing. And lastly, this is just sort of a point. I don't know how you guys will plan to do your own research. You should all explore your own kinds of methodology. But think about the moment you are in a room or on the street talking to someone or in a Zoom call like this. Think about leaning into those silences, those like, ask your question and just take a breath and see what people say. And if they still haven't said anything, take another breath. Because often, if you just leave it a little bit longer, people will end up sharing something with you really interesting. So this is something I'm learning for myself more recently, because time after time, this is maybe another point for when you sort of go out into the world, the professional world, is ensure that you always have a bank of questions that you're asking yourself. Could be physical, could be digital, but a list of questions that are your own research questions that you would be asking. You know, I've stolen this from a pretty well-known physicist who essentially is pretty reputable in terms of the space of learning. He recommends that you create a document that is called your 12 favorite problems. And today, as I mentioned before, I'm sharing with you a version of a question I'm asking myself. One of my 12 questions is, what do I do for a living? What's the point? How do I want to do it? How do I define future projects and the way that I work on those projects? There's obviously different iterations of how you could ask that question that sort of push it in different directions. But ultimately, you're going to have a set of subjects that Mike is going to sort of brief you with, or other teachers and lecturers in the school. And if you can create some harmony between those questions that are most interesting to you and, say, some of the briefs that are coming in, you probably will find it more gratifying. So yeah, research is a question. And I do want to just point out that a lot of all the photos that I'm sharing with you here today are from people I've met and from places that I've been and things that I really care about. Because as you'll find out, this is something that I believe is important in research. All right, how are we doing? Are people, can you still hear me? Is there any questions that are just coming up? I just want to double check that that we're all good. I'm actually looking for how the heck I get back to the chat. Mike, can you see the chat room? Is there any questions coming through? I don't hear anything, so I'm just going to keep going. Oh, hang on a second, I got it. Great. All good, thank you, great. Right, if anyone has any other questions, please just pop them in the chat. At the end, we can have a discussion if there's time, and I'll make sure I look back over these questions, and if there's not time to answer them, I'll get back to you guys at a later date. All right, carrying on. Good people. Research, to a certain extent, requires that you have good people. So let's explore what good people means. So we have to engage with people to whom these questions matter most. And so people, broadly speaking, can be defined in a number of ways, depending on the project, depending on the client. You might be using your intellect and pointing your questions at stakeholders, customers, audiences, consumers, even buzzwords like mindset might be used. But ultimately, their opinions and their beliefs might be different from yours, and that's okay. Often it can be it's a bit of a strange situation because we're human and we want to interact, we want to engage with the people that we're meeting. It's so easy to be listening at the other side of the table and be going, yeah, that's me. I'm jumping into some personal anecdote about your mother and how she cooks. Who knows? But the point is, you're there to listen, you're there to observe, and to make people feel comfortable. So good people. It can be explaining something, as I just said, to your mom, discussing a burning question with your friends or your neighbor. That often is how research starts. It's just sort of getting initial feel by talking to people in your immediate environment. But it has to go beyond recruiting your own kind of people. Say, I don't know where you'll be doing your, where you guys are from or where you will be working in the future. But advertising, communication, you meet a certain type of person, you work with a certain type of person, they're international, they're well-educated, and sometimes that is not the space that you are being required to research. So it's really important to extend beyond that into the real world. So good people are more knowledgeable than you, who are connected to your research questions, and that could be loosely and directly. So for me, some of the people that I've involved in projects or aspire to use in projects are some of the following: athletes, professors, school chefs, police officers, writers, technologists, designers, photographers, and indeed prostitutes. Now, that might sound a little bit alarming or offensive, but actually it's something that I stumbled across at the beginning of my career by this gentleman called Rob Campbell. And he's a great individual. He's really supportive of the community. And he sort of coined this term quite a while ago called having informants. And he actually has police officers and prostitutes that he has involved in the projects. I think I want to remember the specific anecdote, but I think if I remember correctly, he was working for a car brand. I don't know whether it was BMW or Mercedes or whatever. And this car brand had a really set idea about the kind of person that would drive their car. So what they did is they invited a series of prostitutes into a meeting room with that client. And then they showed images of these different branded cars and asked them for their responses. And just to keep the story short, the responses were completely different, very informing for the client. and from the perspective of somebody who really understands the kind of person that would be driving a certain type of car. Anyways, so yes, research is good people. The third kind of pillar to sort of how I'm thinking about research is, and this is maybe a little bit more of a recent perspective. I think when I was a little bit younger, I used to sort of like, sounds very unscientific and a bit cheesy, but like follow my heart and my intuition on things. But establishing a system, understanding a better way to digest and cope with this incoming knowledge and experience is you need to have a pretty good system for that. So let's get into that. Systems help us optimize how we learn as people. They bring about a process that respects the limitations of our brain. They are systems that integrate smartly with technology. They embrace healthy living and work environments. Systems essentially free us up to be more human. They facilitate productivity and they foster good ideas. So within a good system, you should be able to ask yourself questions like this and respond accordingly. Does this idea or this insight need more time or exploration to be better understood? Or in some instances, you might fail. Your hypothesis that you come up with may become redundant. But you have to look at things through the lens of a bigger system, of a bigger set of ideas that you're sort of working on, and establish how they're connected. Lastly, research should include a system of methodologies. So when I say methodologies, I think I used this word earlier and I maybe didn't explain it. But for me, I showed you a slide at the beginning where I mentioned that qualitative research is about doing interviews and group sessions. That is methodology. But perhaps you only have secondary research at hand or secondary sources. That would be another type of methodology. Perhaps you are really good with data and able to visualize it in some really amazing way using some particular type of software to tell a story that people will understand. Research isn't necessarily just my way. There's a variety of ways to do it, and I encourage you to look at that. But I would insist that you think about how you bring it to life. So these are a few I know that I just shared quite a few sort of like bullet points around research as a system, and that's because I'm thinking about it a lot at the moment. I'm thinking about, literally, my job is to learn things. It's such a privilege to get to learn about culture and business for a living. But I've never really stopped until recently to ask myself, what is my best operatus modus, modem, maybe I'm saying it wrong. How can I best get the best situation out of the people I'm working with? Recently I've worked with teenagers and understanding how their brains are different to mine, and they're at a different point in their life where their chemistry is just completely different. Establishing a system and an environment that gets the best out of your subject. And then I think I just want to say one more thing, because I think it's a recent sort of like a frustration that I've sort of worked on, is figuring out, there's this course I've just been doing called Building a Second Brain. And I know that you guys are probably having to consume a lot of different lectures and reading, and it's super overwhelming. And on top of that, you're probably, getting exposed to various different social feeds and private WhatsApp groups, and there's a lot. And figuring out ways to channel this incoming knowledge is super important. And everyone is different, and everyone has different ways of doing that. But I would really sort of recommend that before you get onto starting these projects, you think about the system that will work for you. So, research is a system. Okay, so then lastly, research is documenting. What do I mean by that? Well, research requires that we document the noteworthy. And that is not the manual documentation of everything. That is not writing every word that comes out of my mouth. We literally have to package our notes in a way that our future self, who can't remember what the hell we did or said or experienced, would know or understand. We have to package it in a way that they will that you will be able to understand later. So really think about not just the system that you're creating, but the content of your ideas and how you structure them. So yeah, I just sort of put a sort of little alert in here. So stop and check yourself. Are you typing every word that I say right now? That's maybe I sound a little bit confident to say that, but that's not what my intention. In any class that you go to, how do you go through that class? How do you listen to the lecturer? How do you listen to the teacher? How do you take notes? Are you hoping to write everything down and remember it later? Like, how many of you on the other side of this call are really stop and consciously listening and thinking about what you know and what you're receiving is and how that's shaping your own thoughts? So yeah, I put myself in a slide. A note is not a verbatim record of what must be remembered, but a reconstruction and elaboration of knowledge itself, laced with meaning and personal understanding. And then finally, I've really struggled to not put in more imagery. I've kept this presentation really simple because I was exploring the sort of the words of how I operate within research. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this, research is really about documenting the real world experience. I know that that's a little tricky considering the times that we live in, but there are still ways to make things of what you're learning, and to really consider the nuance of what is being shared with you and the things that are not being shared with you. And again, this last point, very boring, but literally there's been numerous times that I've been working for clients and we've lost something. Something that someone said, a video that captured the way someone moved, or so on and so on. Backing your stuff up is super important. Do it regularly and do it meticulously, even if you struggle with organization. So research is to document. Okay, so I've just shared with you sort of like my own personal experience of what research is for me as a definition. It's about questions, good people, systems, and documenting, which is to say, it's about the depth of the depth that you go to shape the questions you want to ask. It's about the type of people who you want to bring in and shed new light on something. It needs to be diverse. It cannot be flat. It's got to be varied. It's got to be interesting. To think about the system that you operate in, to sort of manage this knowledge, to ensure that you get the best out of yourselves and others. And lastly, something that I really am passionate about, which is the art of how you capture and bring things to life. So much research out there is super boring and just hundreds of slides of numbers and bullet points. And so be brief, be creative, and make things. So at this point, I would encourage you to look back over this presentation and ask yourself what research is for you, and think about where you guys are going. Because right now, I know that you're kind of early on in the semester of the first semester of the year. So there's an opportunity to make it as interesting as possible, to somehow tie these burning questions that you may have for yourself and the way you want to live your life and the kinds of clients that you want to work for, the kind of industries that you would like to live in. Think about it, and I would be kind of interested to know what your perspectives are.